Phillipsburg Land Use Board, September 23rd, 2021. Discussion and approval of Peron warehouse application with many temporary waivers. The Land Use Board has just returned from a 25-minute executive session where they discussed legal matters. Maybe the legal matters prompted some members to recuse themselves, even though in a prior vote on this topic they did not. Our thanks to those members who recused themselves to prevent a potential conflict of interest. As per Keith Zwicker, towards the end of this video, this application had 15 temporary waivers. The Land Use Board deemed the application complete with 15 temporary waivers.
So, Mr. Duffy, I just want to say that we left the executive session, and during the executive session, we discussed attorney-client privilege matters, and we're not taking any formal action.
Right. Okay. And but we need a motion to return, right?
Well, we made the motion to return in the executive session.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry that we did that twice. Okay. First, a little housekeeping matter. I'm not exactly sure who the person is, but there's a Kennedy Lewis Clark political sign being displayed on the Zoom meeting. If we were in a public forum, that sign would not be allowed in the public forum. So I am requesting that that person change their background to something non-political. Did that person hear me?
Hold on a sec. That's me? No.
Do you have a Kennedy Lewis Clark sign up?
No.
Actually, Derek Lewis who has it up.
Yeah.
Yep, working on changing that right now, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Peron Construction LLC, 170 Howard Street, B1, 2102, lots 2 and 11. I am turning the meeting for this hearing over to Mr. Zwicker. I am recusing myself from this hearing.
Okay, Mr. Chairman. So Mr. Zwicker as Vice Chairman will take over, and Mr. Vice Chairman, you need to inquire if anybody else is recusing themselves.
Yes, is there anyone else that wishes to recuse themselves? Or do we just want to announce that stuff?
Yeah, so is there anybody else who is intending to recuse themselves from the Peron application? If so, please unmute and state.
I am.
That's Mayor Tersigni.
Yes, sir.
Okay, is there anybody else? Mr. Bensavenga left the meeting. He had advised us in executive session that he was intending to recuse himself from this application too. So that leaves us still with 6 people, which is more than a quorum, and the application will proceed with Mr. Zwicker chairing the proceeding.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Wilhelm, may
Yes.
I ask the basis for the recusals?
You can ask, but I'm not going to answer. They chose to recuse themselves.
Okay.
So we're going to do a completeness review. Stan, you want to take us through that?
So, Mr. Peck, if you want to start with a brief summary and then introduce your witnesses.
If I may, Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the board, for the record, my name is Mark Peck. I'm an attorney with the Florio Perucci Law Firm here on behalf of the applicant, Peron Construction LLC. we filed an application for a 420,000 square foot warehouse at 170 Howard Street. That's at block 2102, lot 2.02. I know that the tax maps show it as lots 2 and 11, but a few years ago, a small piece of that property was given to the Railway Museum, and the lots were merged, and new lot 2.02 was created. The tax records of the town properly reflect this. It's just the tax map hasn't caught up to that yet. So it's just one lot and it's 2.02. And that is in your riverfront redevelopment area. Now, we noticed for a public hearing tonight, perhaps overly optimistically, but we are here for completeness only. So if we are fortunate enough to leave this meeting tonight with a completeness determination, I would ask that the notice be carried. But beyond that, we have our site engineer, Brad Bowler, as well as our traffic engineer, John Witchner. I don't anticipate we'll need to call on him, but we are in receipt of the Van Cleef September 21, 2021 review letter, which updates the August 20th completeness memo. We do have a number of completeness and other waivers that we're seeking. And I'll let you and Mr. Bowler, Mr. Schreck and Mr. Bowler go through those.
And before we go any further, I was remiss in saying that I've reviewed the notice, and proper notice was given. So the board, in fact, has jurisdiction over this. And I reviewed the certification that the taxes are current through September 30th, 2021. So those issues are met. And then I did have an opportunity to review the witness, Mr. Bowler's qualifications. I forwarded that to the board. Based upon what I've reviewed, I would recommend that the board accept Mr. Bowler as an engineering expert. But Mr. Zwicker, you can inquire if the board wishes to question Mr. Bowler at all.
If anybody on the board has any questions, but everything that was submitted looks good. So unless somebody has a question, I do him.
And then Mr. Peck, if we could just then we'll mark his as A1, his CV.
His CV, sure.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Wilhelm. Okay, so does Mr. Bowler need to be sworn?
Yeah, I'm sorry, my bad. Mr. Bowler, do you swear that the testimony you'll give in this case will be the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, great.
Mr. Peck and Mr. Bowler, you can do like the last one did, kind of have your
Yeah,
engineer.
that was probably in the interest of time to have actually Mr. Schreck kind of take the lead with Mr. Bowler. Starting on page 2 of the
I'll
letter.
start on page 1, Mark, if that's okay. And if my
That's
phone,
fine.
yeah, I have a jury rig set up here because I left my laptop at work, so I'm on my phone. So if it falls off my rig, it's I'll put it back. So we issued a completeness letter back on August 20th, 2021, and we received a response from Mr. Bowler on September 10th, 2021, which basically was a letter that indicated they would address the completeness items as the project went forward. So with that, I reset the completeness items as well as continued with a preliminary review. A preliminary review was distributed, and we understand now that preliminary is going to be addressed later, and we may have an opportunity to review some of these comments that are in my letter. So right now, let's just go down the checklist just like we did with the last application. So now we can move to page 2, and that's under the general submission checklist. And under development staging, we recommended that a temporary waiver be required, and the applicant in their response on September 10th indicated that they would be providing testimony at the hearing on that. And we concur that that's proper and would recommend that the board give a temporary waiver on that. Taxes and assessments, the board's going to have to determine, Kelly, if the taxes were all paid.
Yes, we're good there.
Okay. And as well as fees required under the general submission checklist.
Yes, and we're good there.
Okay, now we'll go to the preliminary site plan checklist. Application for preliminary site plan shall reflect and review the design guidelines in a later section of the ordinance. Applicant indicated they want a temporary waiver on that, and we would recommend a temporary waiver as the site plan develops. Or correction, yeah, temporary waiver as the site plan develops. I'm sorry. Drawing scale, the applicant's now requesting a waiver for the drawing scale. The drawing scale doesn't match what the ordinance says, but that's due to the size of the site and the drawing scale that requires adequate for review. And we recommend that that permanent waiver be granted. Name and address of the application. Temporary waiver was requested. Applicant is asking for the temporary waiver, and it has to be added to the plan set. I think we know who the applicant is from the application. A temporary waiver would be addressed when they give us a revised plan set, so I recommend a temporary waiver for that also. Acreage, municipal tax law, et cetera. This is just information that wasn't added on the cover sheet, which can be added later on. It wasn't on the submittal. We can ask for a temporary waiver. Expect we'll have revised plans before we have the preliminary hearing. For completeness issues, I would recommend a temporary waiver. Same applies to the next, which is the key map that's required to get a temporary waiver. Expect that would be on the subsequent set. All existing and proposed utility, applicants asking for a temporary waiver on that also. It was not included in this application. We would expect that on the next submission, so I recommend a temporary waiver be granted also for completeness purposes. Location of existing buildings within 200 feet. The plans have to be updated for that. We have that for preliminary. We can move forward, so we would recommend a temporary waiver for completeness. Analysis of proposed utilities. And the capacity to accept the utilities downstream. Well, temporary waiver, but that's going to require an engineering report that I expect we would have by the time we get to preliminary. So if the board wishes to grant that temporary waiver, we'll have continued conversations with the engineer. Plan detail for items within 100 feet of the site. Applicant's going to have to give us that information eventually, so we could do temporary waiver to move forward. And if we have that on the site plan by the time we have preliminary, I would recommend moving forward. Traffic impact, temporary waiver was requested for that. We received a traffic impact analysis, but that was comparison.
I think we lost Stan for a second.
Yeah, we lost him. So he's frozen.
Yeah.
Right of way.
Stan,
Someone say something?
Yeah, we
Stan,
lost you at J.
yeah, we need you to go back to J on page 5.
I'm sorry. Small bandwidth. J is a traffic impact statement. That's where I was. The applicant submitted a trip generation comparison. It's not a true traffic impact statement that would be expected. Traffic impact statement would look at what the traffic does throughout the neighborhood, how it's going to affect access to the site, et cetera, and we just don't have that. The applicant's not asking for a waiver of that. We're recommending a temporary waiver, and we would hope we have that information prior to preliminary hearing with sufficient time that we'll be able to review that report. Easements and right-of-way, temporary waiver to indicate that we have all proposed project improvements, intersection improvements, et cetera, that may be required for the site that would have to be in preliminary plans for it to move forward. So we could grant a temporary waiver if the applicant can give us that information. Additional properties, the applicants provided the 200-foot list for the PQ, the property in question. We'll ask for verification that there is no other properties that are that will be under consideration for this application. That might relate to extension of Howard Street, as we'll get into further discussion on that, or other properties that affect circulation on the site.
So Mr. Peck, I just want to stop there for a second. Obviously, L is a big one for the applicant because it affects jurisdiction. If there's going to be any off-site impacts, proper notice would need to be given, as you know.
Right. We understood that to mean whether or not the applicant owned any additional property, and currently, yeah, there's no such ownership.
Let me clarify, because I did ask you directly if the applicant owned any other lots nearby, and you've addressed that, and I verified that, so we're okay. But what Stan is saying is there has been some discussion maybe that something might have to happen on McKean Street. And if that's the case, in order to get the proper jurisdiction, if you're going to be affecting another lot and block, everybody within 200 feet of that lot and block obviously would need to be noticed. So I'm just bringing that to your attention. So come October 28th, it's not a surprise.
Understood, and I appreciate that.
Yep.
Good, thank you. Plans and profiles, 500 feet of adjoining intersections. Right now, I would recommend a temporary waiver. We may have further discussions later on that as a plan develops. Sewage disposal and water supply temporary waiver. We do not have the will serve letters from the water company or the sewer entity. Those would have to be submitted. And phasing we would discuss during preliminary. So I'd recommend a temporary waiver on that. So if in summary, I would recommend all the temporary waivers as noted in my letter of September 21st, with the one permanent waiver of drawing scale, which is indicated on page 3 of my letter as 2B.
Thank you, Mr. Trick.
Mr. Peck, I don't know if you a witness wants to comment on that. Doesn't have to, but welcome to.
No comments from our perspective.
Yeah, and I'd like to add that our engineers will be meeting with Mr. Schreck on Monday to go over the contents of his technical review. So with that, we would ask, subject to the waivers that were just discussed by Mr. Schreck, we would ask that we be deemed complete and a date for the public hearing be set.
So before Mr. Zwicker solicits a motion, again, looking at what is required for waiver, because these are temporary waivers, I don't see any problem with that. They're not final waivers, and that can be a discussion next time, but these are temporary waivers except for the one permanent waiver, which I think is pretty minor. So I believe that if the board chooses to, they can grant the temporary waivers as set forth in Mr. Schreck's letter.
Yes, we're looking at the 15 temporary waivers plus your engineers meeting with Stanley next week. All those in favor of granting the temporary waivers?
But hold on, I think we should solicit a motion.
Okay. Do I have a motion for the temporary waiver?
I'll make a motion that we accept all the waivers.
And a
Second, I'll second it if I can.
Mr. Penrose and Mr. Rooney. First and
Yes.
second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? All right, the temporary waivers carry.
Scott, I have a question.
Yeah.
I don't, since everybody was here, Mr. Rooney actually can't second that motion because he's not actually part of the,
That's correct. I'm glad you caught that because I missed who seconded it. So we need somebody else to second the motion for the 15 temporary waivers and the 1 permanent waiver.
I'll second that motion.
Mr. Folker.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
I still don't understand how this works, to be honest with you. I've been doing this for over 30 years. I still understand.
You're called upon when needed. You're not needed.
You can vote, Bernie, at times. You can't approve anything up front. All right, Stan, do you want to go over zoning or you?
No. So now,
No.
Well, now we just need I would recommend that we take a vote on completeness, and I believe then we're going to end there for tonight. So, Mr. Zwicker?
All right, so I need a motion for completeness.
So
Motion.
moved.
Second,
Second.
who was that?
It was Bobby Fulper.
Oh, I thought you made the motion, Bob.
Oh, I thought someone made the motion over me, Keith. I apologize.
Okay,
So
John, is that you that made the motion and Bob seconded?
I made the motion, John Turnbull.
Okay.
Oh, John, okay, I'm sorry, John. John, second, oh, there you are. All right. All those in favor, or do you want to do a roll call, Kelly?
You can do a voice vote.
Can we do it?
Yeah.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Ayes carried.
Thank you very much.
So we'll go over the zoning and
That's at the public hearing, which is, and I'll just announce that this matter is now carried to the October 28th regularly scheduled meeting at 7 p.m. The applicant is not required to provide any further notice. This is the notice for all interested parties.